My name is Jeremy Bailenson, and since 1999, I've been building immersive virtual reality, putting people inside VR, and testing to see what happens to the brain, testing to see how people use VR, and testing to see which applications work. So I'm very appreciative to be here today and to get to talk to you about this technology and how we can think about it in terms of end of life. 3 goals for today. Number 1, all of us walk out of here understanding how virtual reality works from a technological standpoint. Number 2, we go over some examples of how I've used VR in the last 2 decades to solve some pretty hard psychological problems. Number 3, we all brainstorm on when we apply this amazing technology to designing the end of life, that there's a lot of real action there. And I'm really hoping that there's some conversations that flow out of this. So can we start by raising your hand if you've ever been in virtual reality before? About half of you. Raise your hand if you've been in VR and gotten to walk around. Okay, about 10% of you. Fantastic. So I'm going to flash you back to the year 2001. So my PhD was in cognitive psychology. In 1999, I left that field to learn how to build VR and to test its effects on people. In the year 2001, we flew to Washington, D.C., and we were at a conference at the Federal Judicial Center where we were trying to figure out how one would apply virtual reality to the courtroom. For example, recreating crime scenes or having witnesses look at suspects to do police lineups. And we were there in 2001. We flew all of our super heavy equipment across the country. This is from Santa Barbara, where I was doing my postdoc. And we give this demo on site in DC. And we had a judge put on the goggles. This was a federal judge. And we gave him our best demo. So if those of you come to my lab, the best demo that shows how amazing VR is what we call the pit. And in that demo, you put on the goggles, and you look around, and you see a 3D model of the room. It looks just like you're here. And you walk around, and you say, oh, that's neat. We then hit a button, and we drop a chasm. That chasm is about 10 meters deep, and it's about 3 meters to get across, and we put a little rickety plank that you see in the image above to get across. Okay? The point of this demo is it feels so real to be on there. It's an amazing experience. This judge that we brought in, there's a room about this size, about 500 people, high-end lawyers and judges were watching. And this gentleman, he was crossing the plank, and he just stepped a little bit to the left, okay, off of that board. We're tracking gravity, so when he steps off from what his eyes are telling his brain and what his ears are hearing with spatialized sound, he feels like he's plummeting to the bottom of that chasm. Okay? Now, if you were in the real world and you fell off that plank, how would you save your life? You would dive at a 45-degree angle to try to catch the lip of that edge that's starting to move away from you. And so this federal judge, in the middle of a room of just like this, just decided to dive at a 45-degree angle into the air. It gets worse. This is my first public demo. I've since given thousands per year. The computer was sitting on a table with a really sharp corner, okay? So I was a 26-year-old postdoc. I basically had one move, and that was to smash into him to redirect his trajectory so his face didn't hit the corner. So he was fine. Okay, he was a good sport about it. We didn't get sued. We didn't go to jail. But the reason I waste 2 of your valuable minutes on this story is that this is called by psychologists presence. Presence is defined as the illusion of non-mediation. When VR is done well, there's no pixels, there's no field of view, there's no gadgets. It's just an experience that you have. And everything I'm going to talk about for the rest of this lecture takes as an assumption that VR is so real that the front of your brain, you can say, this is not real, this is not real. But the back of your brain, that part that's in charge of keeping you alive, cannot overcome the illusion. Here's my lab at Stanford. It's an amazing technological lab. We've got a great tracking system to measure your movements. We've got a floor that shakes. We've got 24 speakers that can move sound around the room. We do virtual scent. We get visits from heads of states. We get visits from the US military, from CEOs who are evaluating, should I use VR for my company? But now that I've bragged about my lab, let me convince you that it is becoming completely obsolete from a technological standpoint. Of all the papers that I've published over the last 2 decades, about 3/4 of them are done using the goggles that you see on the right. Each one of them costs more than my car. Okay, I drive a Ford C-Max, so maybe that doesn't say all that much. But $40,000 was the typical price tag for head-mounted displays historically. Now that Facebook and Samsung and Google and HTC and Sony are in the game, goggles are $100, $200, and we've gone from the point where instead of there being at its peak, 5-7 years ago, 1,000 headsets, 2,000 headsets in the world, there's now tens of millions of them. Okay? So this is Popper. Popper turned 93 2 days ago. In this picture, he was 90, and like those of you who raised your hand, when I put Popper in VR, he looked around and he said, this is kind of cool, but really, what's the point? What am I supposed to do in here? What's the point? And what we're going to talk about for the rest of today is what is a good use case of VR. And good use cases of VR, in my opinion, are things that leverage a paradox. The paradox is this. The brain treats VR as real. Remember, that judge dove at a 45-degree angle. But you can do anything. If a programmer can imagine a simulation, you can go back in time, you can grow a third arm, you can be a different age, a different gender, you can break physics. You can create these fantastical experiences, but the brain treats them as if they were real. And this is where VR really earns its keep. Now, VR is not for everything, okay? I'm a VR guy, I do nothing but study VR for the last 2 decades, and I don't use it at home. I don't play video games. I don't have a Facebook account. 5 years from now, if you guys are checking your email in VR, then I have failed miserably as an evangelist. Okay? It's not for that. It's for very special experiences. I'm going to give you an example. The first industry grant I got at Stanford was from a company called Cisco. And a woman named Marcia Satowski came to the lab, and she put on the goggles. She tried out the demo I'm about to show you. It's a virtual mirror. And the virtual mirror leverages 2 types of psychological theories. The first one is called the contact hypothesis. In the 1960s, when schools were segregated, psychologists and sociologists came up with a theory that said, if we get people who are different and just put them together, they're going to learn to get along. That's a simplification of the theory, but the general idea is that physical contact with people who are different eventually will cause you to get along with the outgroup. The second theory, it leverages something called body transfer. Body transfer is a neuroscientific principle that if I move physically, and I see an avatar, a digital representation of myself, move with me, that after about 4 minutes of me moving my arm and seeing that avatar move with me, the brain treats that avatar as if it were a part of me. In other words, from a neuroscience standpoint, when I think of myself, a part of the brain lights up. When I see my avatar, the same part lights up. In other words, that avatar becomes us. Now, I'm going to show you a movie. Please don't laugh at it. It's 15 years old, and this is the first VR demo that we ever built to cause people to join those 2 theories, which is instead of being around someone who's different, what about you become them? So this is Nick Yee, the genius that did a lot of this early work starting around 2003. He's moving around the physical room. He walks up to a mirror. In the experiment, he does this for about 2 or 3 minutes. You're only going to see this for about 10 seconds. He moves his head to the left. The avatar moves with him. He continues to do a series of physical movements and sees the synchronous movements of the avatar. He bends down. We hit a button. He comes up, and now he's a woman of color. Okay? And the reaction that you get when your body changes and you become someone else is very intense. Okay? Our experiments for the last 15 years have shown when you become someone else, it could be a different age, different race, different gender, different species, that compared to watching a video, doing role-playing, becoming someone else and experiencing trauma firsthand causes you to behave differently, causes you to change your attitudes and behavior in a way that's stronger compared to other treatments people have tried in the past. To give an example, Fernando Herrera, a 4th-year PhD student in my lab, worked on this project for the last 3 years, and it just got published a week ago. In this study, she had people become homeless. They found out that situational factors can cause you to lose your home. You lose your job, you try to sell stuff in your apartment, you can't make enough money, you get evicted, you try sleeping in your car. It's an intense body experience where you actually become homeless and you feel what it's like to get harassed on the street. What Fernando studies is, compared to lots of control conditions, after this, are you willing to sign a petition that says, I'm willing to have my own personal taxes increased in order to support affordable housing measures? And she actually has them physically sign a real petition. What she's discovered is even 2 months out, compared to a control condition, becoming homeless causes more behavior change compared to role playing. And this is the type of studies that we do. We can also study empathy not to others, but to ourselves. So Hal Hirschfeld, who's now professor in the business school at Stanford, his dissertation was about connecting to your future self. And he took 20-somethings, brought them to the lab, and we scanned their bodies. They walked up to that virtual mirror, did body transfer with their age-appropriate self. They were in their 20s. We then hit a button and used computer graphics to age them such that they got to meet themselves when they're going to be 70. In other words, they got to become their future self and experience that. And what Hal cares about is financial planning for the future. And what he gave these subjects is the option of, here's $20 now, but if you wait and put it in a savings account, we're going to give you 40. And similar treatments like that. To make a long story short, across dozens of experiments, Hal demonstrates that becoming older in the virtual mirror causes you to defer gratification and causes financial savings. Now, we are in a huge crisis in this country. 20-somethings are not putting any money in the bank. They're also going to live till they're 90. And so there's going to be this 30 or 40-year period when they're in poverty. So we're working now with a lot of the financial institutions to help them use this principle in their systems to help people save money. So the first to market is Bank of America. What they did, they figured out how to scan your face from the camera in a laptop. And if you open a new Bank of America account, you'll be asked, do you want to do face retirement? If you say yes, it'll scan your face, and your future self becomes part of your banking interface such that every financial decision you make, your future self is staring at you. Okay? And the more money you put in savings, the happier your future self gets. Okay? And at Stanford, we like to call this win-wins. Bank of America is going to get more money in their accounts, and 20-somethings are not going to be in poverty decades from now. We took this principle to Fidelity, and we're working with Fidelity. So one of my graduate students is named Derek Belch. Derek formed a company called Striver, and he's using VR to help companies help people with lots of issues, including those around end of life. Imagine you're at a call center, and you're trying to advise somebody over the phone how to invest their life savings, what percentage to take out of their paycheck. We've used VR to train people in call centers, and while they're in the call center, they hit a button, and then they're in the living room of the person they're advising. They see that she's got crutches and can't walk. They see the stack of bills in front of them on the table. Since Fidelity started using this, customer service evaluations of people in call centers has gone up 10%. This experience of becoming someone else and feeling what it's like helps the people in call centers give better advice to people that are saving for their future. At Stanford, there's a doctor named Ann Dubin, Lauren Schneider, and Lauren Sachs that are building a conversational simulator and testing it to have, imagine you're a doctor, you're a pediatric heart surgeon, and you're sitting across the table from a parent, and you have to tell the parent their child's going to die. There's no practice for this. There's no practice. That moment is going to be etched on the mind of that parent forever. But these interns that are training for this, they get thrown into a real situation, and they've never gotten to try. What we've built is a difficult conversation trainer where these doctors practice delivering this news about end of life. And in our first study, really good results showing that these people are now more prepared to have an actual conversation. I want to talk about scale. So Derek's company, Striver, just signed a contract to put 4 virtual reality training systems in every single one of Walmart's 4,700 stores. So there were 200,000 people, Walmart employees, trained last year in VR. And this year, we are going to have over 1 million, practicing these difficult conversations so that they get better at their job. If we come up with an application about end of life, it can scale. Where do you want to die? Who do you want to be there? What do you want to say? The reason we have virtual reality is because of the flight simulator. Why do we have a flight simulator? Practice. We learn by doing, making mistakes, getting feedback, doing it again, and improving. And why not do this for end-of-life decisions? And there are a number of companies that are building these practice simulations for end-of-life, a number of academics. There's a fun study that came out 3 weeks ago by Mel Slater, where he had subjects, he and his colleagues, literally experience their own death and then figure out how they're going to change their lives in a new way afterwards, and showed lots of positive affect. On that note, I'm going to conclude. And I'm going to thank you for your attention. This is my book, Experience on Demand. VR is not for everything. If there's one thing I would urge you to say, VR is an experience. Experiences can produce change, but it really depends what you do with virtual reality. So thank you for your attention. Appreciate it.